Wittgenstein plays chess with Duchamp, or How Not to Do Philosophy. Wittgenstein on mistakes of surface and depth. There are 181 tokens of the word chess in the Blackwell published works of Wittgenstein. We begin, however, with Marcel Duchamp's chess book. Opposition and sister squares are reconciled. The subject of the specialist book is king and pawn endings. In one of the simpler positions he analyzes, black's temptation is to swoop in with king e4 and attack the white pawn, but king c5 and white would win the pawn. This maneuver is known as trebuchet. Black's only move now is to retreat to one of the squares marked with a K, allowing white to snatch the pawn and go on to win. Tolstoy wrote that happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Is this the same for mistakes? King e4 is not perhaps the same kind of mistake that Oedipus made when he married Jocasta, although both involve regicide. What kind of mistake is king e4? Why would anyone make this move? Duchamp's friend Grandmaster Eugenie Noskoborovsky wrote, "The great privilege of our game is that there is nothing hidden. Everyone can see all that is on the chessboard. It is necessary only to be able to see." After all, everything is open and above board. The element of deception is at a minimum, and there are no closed hands as in bridge. This might seem familiar to some of you, even to those of you who don't read esoteric chess literature. It might remind you of Wittgenstein's Blue Book. This kind of mistake recurs again and again in philosophy. Example, when we are puzzled about the nature of time, when time seems to us a queer thing, we are more strongly tempted to think that here are things hidden, something we can see from the outside, but which we can't look into. And yet nothing of the sort is the case. It is not new facts about time which we want to know. All the facts that concern us lie open before us. Or the philosophical investigations. The aspect of things that are most important for us are hidden because of their simplicity and familiarity. One is unable to notice something because it is always before one's eyes. The real foundations of this inquiry do not strike a man at all, unless the fact has at some time struck him. And this means we fail to be struck by what, once seen, is most striking and most powerful. The contrast between the familiar and unfamiliar interested Wittgenstein throughout his career. In the Brown Book, he writes, "Let us now go back to the idea of a feeling of familiarity which arises when I see familiar objects. And it is not so much as if I were comparing the object with a picture set beside it, but as if the object coincided with a picture. So I see only one thing, not two." So the multiplicity of familiarity, as I understand it, is that of feeling at home in what I see. It might consist in such facts as these: my glance doesn't move restlessly, inquiringly around the object. I don't keep changing the way I look at it, but immediately fix on one and hold it steady. In the Brown Book, he writes, "Let us now go back to the idea of a feeling of familiarity which arises when I see familiar objects. Pondering about the question whether there is such a feeling or not, we are likely to gaze at some object and say, 'Don't I have a particular feeling when I look at my old coat and hat?' In this thematic neighborhood, Wittgenstein's philosophical language often employs metaphors that are aesthetic or come from the arts. Looking at pictures, going to the movies, listening to music. On recognition, he says, it is easy to have a false picture of the processes called recognizing, as if recognizing always consisted in comparing two impressions with one another. It is as if I carried a picture of an object with me and used it to perform an identification of an object as the one represented by the picture. Our memory seems to us to be the agent of such a comparison by preserving a picture of what has been seen before, or by allowing us to look into the past as if down a spyglass. Moving into the center of Wittgenstein's methodology involving Jastrow's duck rabbit image, Wittgenstein's philosophical goal is not to produce theories or theses, but to change our way of looking at things, to change our way of seeing the world. Let us use Duchamp's and Max Ernest's works of art as emblems for two ways of seeing the world, the surface and the depth way. For the depth way, let us look more deeply at Ernest the Hat Makes the Man. If you had a feeling of unfamiliarity or eerie strangeness when looking at it, part of the reason might be the German words in the corner. Wittgenstein observes, German noun all in lowercase letters looks alien. To recognize it, one has to read it attentively. It is supposed to strike us as new, as if we had seen it now for the first time. In the Ernest work, the words are a portmanteau of the made-up, a bit like the Lewis Carroll poem Jabberwocky. We might translate the phrase as Angiospermus stagman, Gymnospermus waterformer, noble former, flattering nervation also, transpress nerves. Angiosperm is a plant whose ovules are enclosed in an ovary, a flowering plant. Gymnosperm is a plant such as a cycad or conifer whose seeds are not enclosed within an ovary. Both German scientific nouns are direct translations of the Greek scientific terms. If English worked the same way, then angiosperm and gymnosperm would be covered seed and naked seed. Combining the words in the image, we can see that the work is partly a meditation on what is hidden and what is unclothed. and that Ernest has uncovered for us a covered seed. This is a picture of a nerve system, and Ernest is portraying an underlying skeletal or nerve structure. Ernest was both a student of philosophy and of psychiatry. If ever a picture called for a Freudian interpretation, even a vulgar one, it is this. If Duchamp had looked up trebuchet in an ordinary French dictionary, he would have found the following three senses. 1. A medieval war machine which the goat rack visually resembles. 2. A bird trap. 3. A very accurate scale used in laboratories. If he also looked it up in an English dictionary, he would have seen a cucking or ducking stool. In addition, there is a pun with the homonymic French verb trébucher, which means to stumble or trip. And of course there is a technical chess meaning, a mutual or reciprocal zugzwang where whoever moves loses. Ernest has taken the familiar side of a man in a hat and going beneath the surface made it unfamiliar. In contrast, Duchamp had taken a supposedly familiar ordinary object and defamiliarized it by a change in location and status, and turned it into a work of art, perhaps by signing it, perhaps by placing it in a museum. Let us go back to the question of what makes us go wrong, what leads us to mistake. Familiarly, one side answers deception, whether psychological, social, or political. There is something hidden that needs to be uncovered. We need to leave our usual surface haunts for the unfamiliar, where the truth lies. Sometimes the theory is that identifying the deception accomplishes the uncovering of the truth. Wittgenstein, on the contrary, says, to go down into the depths you don't need to travel far, you can do it in your own back garden. For what is hidden, for example, is of no interest to us. Wittgenstein once described the situation in philosophy thus. It is as if a man is standing in a room facing a wall on which are painted a number of dummy doors. Wanting to get out, he fumblingly tries to open them, vainly trying them all, one after the other, over and over again. But of course it is quite useless. And all the time, although he doesn't realize it, there is a real door in the wall behind his back. And all he has to do is to turn around and open it. To help him get out of the room, all we have to do is to get him to look in a different direction. But it's hard to do this, since wanting to get out, he resists our attempts to turn him away from where he thinks the exit must be. Wittgenstein writes, work on philosophy is, as work in architecture frequently is, actually more of a kind of work on oneself, on one's own conception, on the way one sees things, and what one demands of them. It is perhaps now time to summon the old self-referential joke. There are two kinds of people in the world, those that divide kinds of people into two and those who do not. We should not confuse the surface-depth dichotomy with another one, those who see the world as problematic and those who do not. It is hard to imagine a philosopher as opposed to, say, a politician in the unproblematic camp. Both the surface skaters and the depth divers see the world as bubblingly complicated. Both believe we are inclined, at least at times, to see the world wrong. Both believe that the world as it strikes us requires a great deal of analysis. But they locate the complications in different places, give different accounts of where and how we go wrong, and engage in different kinds of analysis. What changes when we come to understand not the facts but the attitude? The change is a change of perspective, a rearrangement of what has been in front of us all along. Wittgenstein recorded in his notebooks, "The world of the happy man is a different one from that of the unhappy man. In order to live happily, I must be in agreement with the world, and that is what being happy means." What kind of mistake is King E4 rushing in to take the pawn? What kind of mistake is failing to see the connections before us? They are not identical, but they are cousins. By failing to notice what is there, he ends up on the wrong side of a trebuchet. The chess player does not need a secret revealed, a card turned over. What he needs is to control himself. So partly too the philosopher.